Hi, and welcome to the third installment of the Year 3 of the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign's interview with scientists and subject matter experts. My name is Peter Falcon. I'm a member of the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign team, and today we're going to be interviewing scientist, Dr. Erika Podest of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. Hello, Dr. Erika Podest. Welcome. Hope you're doing well.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, let's go and dive into our first question. It's always one of the first ones we get, and that is, where do you work and how long have you been working there?
So I work at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is in Pasadena, California. That's in Southern California. And I'm a research scientist in the Earth Science Division, specifically in a group called the Carbon Cycle and Ecosystems Group. And I've been working there as a research scientist for about 11 years now.
And an interesting tidbit about yourself is that you are not originally from the United States, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is an interesting tidbit. I am originally from Panama, the country of Panama in Central America, specifically from Panama City.
And in a normal year, when we're allowed to do some travel, do you ever find yourself going back and working with students and teachers and kind of giving back to the community that you grew up in?
Absolutely, I do that quite often. In fact, I go to Panama about once or twice a year, and every time I go back, I try to have some sort of interaction or some sort of outreach activity with students from schools, and just teach them about STEM, talk to them about my work, and hopefully motivate them to follow careers in STEM.
It's really great to be able to kind of just plant that seed and watch it grow, and knowing that these students can see you as an example of something that they can become someday if they work hard and try hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I love being involved in such activities. I find them very rewarding, and just to see that I can potentially have some influence, a positive influence on future scientists and engineers is just very satisfying for me.
And being from Panama, I know you're bilingual, so you speak both English and Spanish. Do you find that being bilingual helps you in communicating your research findings to a broader audience that perhaps most scientists who aren't bilingual can't reach?
Yes, all the time, and it's a great a tool for me to have to be able to speak a second language, because I can reach out now to this whole other audience, as you mentioned, that perhaps is not as fluent in English or do not speak English, and I can talk to them about my science and the importance of earth science.
And I know from personal experience, you're always there when Globe students from Argentina, Uruguay, different Latin American countries, whenever they need something, I know you're always there for them. And we really appreciate that. Thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure.
Another question we have is about your research. What is your primary area of your research?
So my primary focus area is the study of terrestrial ecosystems using satellite images. So I specifically study wetland ecosystems and how climate change is having an impact on these ecosystems, how it's changing the hydrology, and what that means in terms of methane emissions. I also study the vegetation up in the northern high latitudes, Alaska, Canada, Eurasia. And I look at the vegetation growing season length. So what are the impacts of increasing temperatures, global warming, on that period of time when the vegetation is growing and taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere?
And a follow-up question to that would be, what kind of educational background would one need to be able to pursue a career that you have?
So to be a scientist at NASA, you need to have a PhD. And it can be a PhD in the sciences, or it could be in engineering too. So for example, my undergraduate was in electrical engineering. And then I went ahead and I did a master's and a PhD in focused on remote sensing within the applied physics department. So and I'm a scientist. However, I have colleagues that have studied, that have degrees in geography or geology. The important part is to have a PhD in somewhere in a STEM field. And you also need to have a postdoc. So a postdoc is a period of training. It's a short period of training, 1 to 3 years after your PhD. And so once you have a PhD and a postdoc, then you can be hired as a scientist at NASA, at a NASA center. That's usually what it takes to be a scientist.
And do you ever work with any postdocs of your own in your research?
I do, yes. I work with postdocs as well as PhD students, master students, undergraduate students.
Thank you. Another question that we usually get is, what type of questions do you hope to answer with your research findings?
So the main question is, how is climate change impacting terrestrial ecosystems, specifically wetlands and the vegetation in the northern high latitudes? So how are the changes in hydrology, how are the changes in temperature, increasing temperatures affecting these ecosystems?
And do you ever find yourself kind of like studying other things as well that may interest you? I know in the past you've kind of worked with the GLOBE program, mosquitoes as well, and soils. So do you enjoy just kind of working with different things that capture your interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned my primary areas of research, but I have other areas that I've worked in, and other areas that I'm also interested in working in. As you mentioned, the mosquitoes. So I've done some work in looking at how to predict hotspots of mosquitoes and identify areas where there might be a potential risk of mosquito diseases, vector-borne diseases. And so to do that, you need to understand what are the habitats of different types of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes tend to like a certain temperature range, humidity range. They like certain soil conditions. They like very wet conditions. So if you can characterize these conditions with remote sensing data, then you can identify areas where there might be hotspots, abundance of mosquitoes.
It's nice to be able to kind of have your primary emphasis, but then also be able to think like, oh, I'm interested in this area as well. I'm going to kind of just go see what's going on in that area, and having these satellite data as well as student data to be able to kind of choose from.
Yeah, it's been great. Actually, the GLOBE program is a wonderful program because it's focused on citizen science, and that's becoming more and more important for scientists. The data that's collected by citizen scientists. We can observe a lot from space, but many times we need ground data, what's called in situ data, as a reference to be able to validate what we're seeing from space. And that's where the citizen science data becomes very, very useful. Because a lot of times from space, we're seeing very large areas. And when you can identify or characterize a certain environmental variable with an in situ measurement, then that really helps us understand what the satellite is seeing.
We're finding that a lot more with scientists being able to use these student observations, as you mentioned, in situ measurements. One last question that we do have for you is, can you give any example of a question related to trees, land cover, or carbon cycle that you think GLOBE student research should try to answer with their own research?
Sure. I'll actually give you two. One is an easy one. And so we all talk about trees, and trees, if you plant trees around your house, they really help modulate temperature, right? And sometimes they can keep your house cool in summer, depending on how close it is to your house, and how many leaves the tree has. But it can really help you keep your house cooler and reduce your electrical bills, for example. So one question is for students is to go out and measure the temperature under a tree and in an area where there is no tree, right? An area that's exposed. And what are the differences in temperature? So that they can understand the role in that trees have in modulating temperature. And then another question, and this one is a bit more difficult, and students will have to do a little bit more research on this one, is as you know, trees take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they store it in their trunks, the leaves, the branches. So they store carbon. So how much carbon approximately does a tree store? And how does that compare to the amount of carbon or carbon dioxide that your car is emitting whenever you use it for a certain distance? So that's quite an involved question, and you'll have to do a bit of research for that one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that was our last question. I just want to say thank you very much, Dr. Podest, for taking time to talk with us today about your research. We look forward to hearing more about carbon cycle and the roles trees play in that cycle when you do your webinar presentation on Tuesday, November 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, at 8 p.m. UTC. And once again, the webinar entitled, your presentation is titled Trees, the Lungs of the Earth. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Podest. We really appreciate you being here with us today. The students are going to really appreciate hearing this interview. And once again, we look forward to seeing your presentation on November 11th.
Thank you, Peter. I look forward to next Tuesday and to interacting with all of the students and teachers that will be dialing in for my talk.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Thank you very much, Dr. Podest.